My father looked straight at me across the kitchen island of the lakeside vacation house and said, "You really couldn't just show up and enjoy the weekend like everyone else could. Your stepmother spent weeks making sure this gathering would feel right for the whole family, and you decided to question every single choice we made. If you cared about keeping things peaceful, you would have respected the agreement we all had and left the past alone. We trusted you to be part of this without turning it into another problem, but clearly that was too much to ask. Now the entire long weekend feels heavier because you couldn't let go of whatever you think you're entitled to." Hi, my name is Emily Harper. I am 32 years old. I had driven up from Milwaukee 2 days earlier, telling myself this quiet autumn long weekend at my cousin Laura's new lakeside vacation house in northern Wisconsin would be different. Laura had bought the place in the spring and wanted a small, low-key housewarming for the people she actually cared about. I offered to help coordinate the simple gathering because that is what I do for a living. I organize modest events and small renovation timelines for clients who need things to run without drama. It felt like a safe way to be around family again after months of careful distance. My father's words landed before I had even unpacked my bag. He and my stepmother Linda had arrived the same morning. The moment Thomas Ellis, a longtime family friend who had known my late mother, pulled into the gravel drive with an extra tray of pastries, the air in the open kitchen changed. My father waited until Thomas set the tray down before he turned on me with those 5 sentences, each one delivered in that low, measured tone he used when he wanted everyone to feel the weight of his disappointment without raising his voice. I stood there holding the strap of my overnight bag, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest that always came when he used that particular calm. Laura glanced between us from the other side of the island, her smile fading. Thomas shifted his weight and looked down at the counter like he wished he had stayed in his car a little longer. I had come here because Laura asked. I had helped her sort through paint samples and furniture delivery schedules for the house over the summer, fronting a few small deposits on things she planned to reimburse once her contractor finished. I never asked for credit or a spotlight. I just wanted the weekend to feel easy. Instead, my father's words made it clear that my presence was already being treated as a complication they had hoped to manage quietly. Later that afternoon, while Laura showed Thomas the new dock and my stepmother arranged flowers on the porch, my father pulled me aside near the boathouse. He kept his voice low so it would not carry across the water. "Your stepmother and I had an understanding," he said. "We were going to keep this weekend simple. No old stories, no questions about decisions that were already settled. You showing up and immediately asking why certain people weren't invited, that broke the agreement." I watched a single yellow leaf drift onto the surface of the lake and float away. I asked because Laura mentioned she wanted everyone who helped with the house to feel included, I answered. I didn't realize asking a question counted as breaking an agreement I never knew existed. He gave a small, tight smile that did not reach his eyes. "That is exactly the problem, Emily. You always need to be the one who decides what counts. The rest of us are just supposed to go along with it." I felt the old pattern click into place, the one where any boundary I tried to name became proof that I was difficult. I had spent years trying to be the daughter who smoothed things over, who helped without being asked, who accepted that my role was to make other people's lives easier even when it cost me peace. Coming here had been my attempt to see if that pattern could finally shift. His words told me it had not. That evening, after a quiet dinner on the porch where conversation stayed carefully surface level, I stepped inside to refill a pitcher of water. Thomas was standing at the counter scrolling through his phone, trying to find a photo Laura had asked for. He looked up when I entered and hesitated. "I didn't mean to walk into anything earlier," he said quietly. "Your father, he gets protective about how things look to everyone else." I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. Thomas glanced toward the porch door, then lowered his voice even more. "There are things I probably should have said years ago. Your mother used to talk to me about how your father and Linda handled certain conversations after she passed. I never wanted to get in the middle, but hearing him talk to you like that today, it brought some of it back." He did not elaborate. He just slipped his phone back into his pocket and walked out to join the others. I stood there holding the empty pitcher, feeling the first real crack in the story I had been telling myself about why I kept trying. If you have ever walked into a family gathering hoping the old rules might finally be different, only to hear the same quiet accusation that your presence itself is the problem, then you already know how heavy the rest of that weekend felt. Type respect if this spoke to you. I set the pitcher down on the counter and stepped back out onto the porch, trying to steady my breathing as the cool evening air brushed against my skin. The conversation had already moved on to safer ground, but the weight of my father's words stayed with me through the rest of the night and into the next morning. The following day unfolded in careful layers. My cousin Laura spent the morning showing Mark, her partner, around the property he had helped her finish. Mark was easygoing and quick to laugh, the kind of person who noticed when someone felt off but didn't push. Thomas stayed close to the kitchen, quietly helping Laura with last-minute food prep for the small housewarming gathering that afternoon. My stepmother moved through the house with quiet efficiency, redirecting any mention of the porch lighting or the new dock schedule away from anything I had coordinated. My father watched it all with that same measured calm, occasionally making a comment about how peaceful things could stay if everyone simply respected the plan. I kept helping anyway. I carried chairs to the dock, set out the simple centerpieces Laura had asked for, and answered questions about delivery timelines when Mark asked. Each time I did something useful, I felt the old reflex kick in the one that said, if I just kept being helpful, the tension might ease. It never did. Instead, the small exclusions piled up. When Laura thanked everyone for making the house feel like home, my stepmother smoothly added that family pulls together in these ways, her eyes flicking toward me for half a second before moving on. My father nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. By the time the small group gathered on the dock that afternoon, Laura, Mark, Thomas, my father, my stepmother, and me, the air felt thinner. Mark raised a glass, first toasting the new place and the people who had helped turn it into something real. My father waited until the quiet settled again before he spoke. Some of us have been doing the hard work of keeping this family steady for a long time, he said, his voice carrying just enough for everyone to hear. Your stepmother especially. She understands that real loyalty means knowing when to let certain things stay in the past, instead of turning every gathering into a referendum on old decisions. That's what makes a family work. He didn't look at me when he said it, but the message landed exactly where he intended. Laura shifted beside Mark. Thomas set his glass down a little too carefully. I felt the heat rise in my face and the cold settle in my hands, at the same time the familiar physical contradiction of being publicly diminished while everyone pretended nothing had happened. After the group dispersed, I found my father near the boathouse again. I kept my voice even. Dad, can we talk for a minute? He turned that same small smile in place. If this is about the toast, you're reading too much into it. The weekend was supposed to be simple. You're the one who keeps making it complicated. I helped Laura with the coordination because she asked. I said, I didn't ask for a speech. I just don't understand why every time I try to be part of something, it gets framed like I'm the problem. He stepped closer, lowering his voice the way he always did when he wanted the words to feel private and final. Because you are the problem when you can't accept that some conversations happen without you. Your stepmother and I have an understanding about how this family stays intact. You were included as much as you needed to be. Pushing for more than that only hurts everyone else. If you actually cared about peace, you would stop needing to be the center of every story. The words hit with the same cold precision as the night before. I walked away before I could answer because answering would have meant giving him the reaction he expected. That evening, after the last of the small group had gone and the house had quieted, Thomas sat at the kitchen island scrolling through his phone while Laura and Mark finished cleaning up. He had been quiet since the toast. I was rinsing glasses at the sink when he spoke without looking up. I have some old voice memos from when I was helping your father with a few things last year, he said, almost to himself. I was looking for one about the dock permits, and hold on, he tapped the screen. A second later, two familiar voices filled the quiet kitchen, my father's low and steady, my stepmother's softer, but just as clear. The recording had started in the middle of a sentence. Keep her involved enough that she doesn't start asking questions later, my father was saying. If she pushes on why certain decisions were made without her, remind her how much we've already included her. She responds better to that than to direct arguments. My stepmother's voice answered calm and practical. She hates being the one who disrupts things. Just bring up how it affects the rest of the family and she'll usually back down. It's worked before. We just have to stay consistent about it. Thomas fumbled with the phone, his face going pale as he tried to stop the playback. He hit the wrong button first, and the voices continued for another few seconds, my father saying something about protecting the peace by keeping the story simple before the sound finally cut off. The kitchen went completely still. Laura and Mark had stopped moving. I stood at the sink with water running over my hands, the cold seeping into my skin, while my chest felt too tight to pull in a full breath. Thomas looked at me, then at my father and stepmother who had appeared in the doorway from the porch. My father's expression didn't change. He simply said that was a private conversation. Taking recordings of family discussions without permission is a new low, even for you, Emily. Thomas started to speak, his voice unsteady. I didn't mean to play it. I was looking for, it doesn't matter how it happened, my father cut in his tone, still measured and cold. What matters is that some things are meant to stay between the people who actually have to manage this family. If you had respected that from the beginning, none of this would be happening right now. I turned off the water and dried my hands on a towel, the motion slow and deliberate because my fingers had started to shake. My stepmother stood beside him, her face composed, watching me like she was waiting to see which version of me would appear, the one who smoothed things over or the one who finally stopped. Thomas looked between all of us, regret clear in his eyes. Emily, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner what I heard them say about you. There's more to it than that recording. I didn't want to be the one to... My father interrupted again, his voice dropping into something almost gentle. Thomas, you've done enough for one evening. Emily, if you want this weekend to end without turning into something none of us can take back, you'll let this go. Some loyalties are more important than being right about every little thing. I met his eyes for a long moment. The kitchen felt smaller than it had all weekend. Laura and Mark stayed quiet, but I could feel them watching. Thomas still held his phone like it had betrayed him. I didn't answer my father. I simply walked past him toward the hallway that led to the guest rooms. Behind me, I heard my stepmother say something low to him about fixing this before tomorrow, but I didn't turn around. In my room, with the door closed, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the dark window overlooking the lake. The recording played in my head on a loop, not the words themselves, but the calm certainty in their voices when they talked about managing me like a variable they already knew how to control. I had spent years believing the guilt I felt was my own fault, something I needed to work through so I could stay connected. Hearing it laid out so plainly made every past silence feel heavier. My phone lit up with a text from Thomas. I'm still here if you want to talk. There's something else you should know before you decide what to do in the morning. I didn't reply right away. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and listened to the quiet settling over the house. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear low voices, my father and stepmother still managing the story, even now. The weekend wasn't over yet, and neither was the choice I had been avoiding for years. The next morning arrived with a pale autumn light filtering through the trees around the lakeside vacation house. I woke early, packed my bag in quiet movements, and stepped into the kitchen where Thomas was already waiting with a mug of coffee he had not touched. He looked tired the way someone looks when they have carried a secret too long. He slid a plain white envelope across the counter toward me. Margaret gave this to me a few years ago, he said quietly. She was your mother's closest friend. She kept some old correspondence because she worried about how things were being handled after your mother passed. I didn't open it until last night. I think you need to read it before you decide anything. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single printed page, an email thread from years earlier between my father and my stepmother. The subject line was simple: handling Emily's involvement. The body laid out the same calm strategy I had heard on the recording: keep me helpful enough to fill gaps in family events and projects, but limit my voice in actual decisions. Use reminders of past support and the importance of family peace if I ever question the boundaries they set. The tone was practical, almost businesslike, as if discussing how to manage a difficult account rather than a daughter. I folded the page and placed it back in the envelope. The confirmation settled over me like the cool morning air, steady rather than shocking. The pattern had not been my imagination or my oversensitivity. It had been a deliberate agreement, revisited and refined over time. Thomas watched me. Aunt Diane called Laura late last night, he added. She said she had seen the same thing for years and was glad that someone finally heard it out loud. She wanted you to know you are not the only one who felt managed. I nodded. The pieces fit now why certain relatives had quietly stopped asking me to help with gatherings, why my offers were sometimes accepted and sometimes redirected without explanation. The hidden agreements had shaped more than just my role. They had shaped how the family story was told. I carried my bag to the living room where my father and stepmother were sitting with Laura and Mark. The small housewarming had ended, but the real conversation had not. I placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. I heard the recording last night. I said, keeping my voice even. And I read this email from years ago. The two of you agreed to keep me involved enough to be useful, but not enough to have a real say. You planned to use guilt about family loyalty and past help to make sure I stayed in that role. My father's expression did not shift. That email is old and out of context, he said, the same measured calm in his voice. You are turning private family strategy into some kind of betrayal. If you had simply respected the boundaries we set for this weekend, none of this would have happened. Your stepmother and I have always done what was necessary to keep this family intact. You are the one who keeps making it about your feelings. My stepmother nodded once her hands folded in her lap. We included you as much as was healthy. Pushing for more only creates the very drama you claim to hate. Laura and Mark stayed quiet, but I could feel their attention. I looked at my father directly. I am not pushing for more. I am done being managed. I will not coordinate family events or projects anymore. I will not accept guilt as the reason I should stay silent or fill roles you assign. Any contact between us from now on will be on my terms, and I will not be the person who smooths over the gaps you create. The words landed without drama. My father gave a short, cold laugh. So this is how you repay years of family support, by collecting evidence and issuing ultimatums. You always did need to be the victim in every story. I picked up my bag. I am not the victim. I am simply no longer available for the role you wrote for me. I turned to Laura and Mark. Laura stood and gave me a brief, tight hug. You do what you need to do, she said quietly. Mark nodded once, his expression serious but kind. Thomas followed me to the door and handed me the envelope again. Margaret said to tell you she is sorry it took this long for someone to say it out loud. I drove away from the lakeside vacation house with the envelope on the passenger seat. The road curved along the water for a while before straightening toward the highway. I did not feel the old rush of guilt or the familiar urge to turn the car around and smooth things over. Instead, there was a quiet clarity, the kind that comes when a story you have told yourself for years finally matches the evidence in front of you. The loss was real. I had carried the hope that one day the inclusion would feel unconditional, that the loyalty I gave would eventually earn me a seat at the table without conditions. That hope was gone now. What remained was the steady knowledge that I no longer had to earn my place by staying small or silent. The distance I was driving toward was not punishment. It was the space I needed to stop harming myself with blind loyalty that had only ever protected the agreements I had never agreed to. In the weeks that followed, the anxiety that had lived in my chest for years began to loosen. I declined the next family request to help organise a gathering without the old explanation or apology. I focused on my own work and the friendships that did not require me to manage anyone else's comfort. The calls from my father and stepmother slowed, then stopped when they realised I would not fill the old role. The tension with them remained unresolved, and that was acceptable. Some relationships do not heal when the terms of the relationship itself were never honest. I still think about that weekend sometimes, the recording that played by accident, the letter that confirmed what I had felt but could not prove. The buried deceptions came to light, not because I forced them, but because the people who made them could not keep them hidden forever. The lesson that settled deepest was simple: blind loyalty does not protect the loyal. It only prolongs the harm until the loyal person finally chooses to stop carrying what was never theirs to hold. Thank you for listening to my story. If this spoke to you, type respect in the comments below. What would you have done when you heard that recording and read that letter?